This past week, I was in a conversation with Scott Abel. If you don't know him, he's one of the most influential voices in technical communication and content strategy. He mentioned something another thought leader in structured content had said to him. You don't need to validate our approaches. It just works. Just do it. Well, Scott and I and some others in the field are all trying to build an empirical case, so that comment landed with just a little bit of friction for me. It's been rattling around in my head ever since. I mean, he's not wrong, and my guess, he's in a position where he can say that and be believed. Most of us aren't, though. Those of us in academic positions or making the case to skeptical stakeholders or CEOs have to do the harder thing. Explain why structured approaches to AI actually work. And that explanation starts with a word we use constantly without ever actually pinning down what it means. I'm Lance Cummings, and welcome to my, what seems to be monthly podcast that explores deep research on AI and writing. So here's the problem. We use information to mean everything. Context is information, instructions are information, facts, procedures, principles, background knowledge, all information. When everything is information, the word stops really doing useful work. Maybe that vagueness has been manageable in content design and writing and technical communication, where the main cost has often been just poor user experience. But it's becoming a real problem as we try to build AI systems that go beyond generating text to building systems that persuade, explain, and instruct in ways that actually serve readers. This is also what we call rhetoric. If we're going to make progress in this area, then we need to make clear the difference between data and information. It's a distinction that philosopher Luciano Floridi has been developing for 25 years, and it turns out rhetoric has been working on the same problem for about 2,500 years. We just use different words. So in his short book, Information, A Short Introduction, Floridi draws a hard line between data and semantic information. Data is just stuff, symbols, signs, marks on a page, maybe even just random words. Information is what data becomes when it clears three conditions. It must be well-formed, meaningful, and true. All three. Miss one and you still have data, regardless of how well organized it is. And here's what that looks like concretely. Imagine someone hands you these facts about making pot roast. A pot roast takes 3 hours. Brown the meat first. You need carrots, potatoes, and beef. Cook at 325 degrees. Season with salt, pepper, and rosemary. And the meat should reach 145 degrees internally. Every fact is accurate, but try to cook from it. Do you season before or after browning? Do the carrots go into the oven at the start or at the end? When do you check the temperature? The facts don't tell you because nothing in the list says what kind of thing each fact is. Now take the same 6 facts and organize them by what they're for. What you need: beef, carrots, potatoes, salt, pepper, rosemary. What do you do first? Brown the meat, then season. How it cooks: 325 degrees for 3 hours. How do you know it's done? Internal temperature hits 145. Same facts, but the arrangement has added something that no individual sentence contained: a claim for what each piece is for. So ingredients are what you gather before you start, steps are what you do in sequence, and conditions are what you verify. That categorical claim, this is the kind of thing it is what converts data into information you can actually act on. And really notice something. You probably recognize the second version as a recipe before you even finish reading it. The structure is a genre or a pattern that signals this is organized for use before you've even processed a single one of those facts. So the format itself is actually information, or can be. Most AI failures aren't random. They around these three conditions that center around these conditions of information. A hallucination fails the third condition, well-formed and meaningful, but not true. A misunderstood instruction often fails the first. Parsable, but not well-formed for the specific task, so not usable. A prompt full of relevant content can fail the second, accurate facts that the model can't construct meaning from because the context lacks coherence or is simply missing. And we've been treating these as model problems. But Floridi's framework says they're information quality problems, which means they have structural solutions, not just scale solutions. So adding more content to your prompt doesn't fix any of it. So let me bring in a framework that might seem like a detour, but isn't. Roman rhetoricians organized the work of communication into 5 areas called canons: invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. And I'll be coming back to all 5 in a longer piece. And it might look familiar to you if you've taken a writing class, because we often organize the writing process around these 5 canons, though we may not use those exact words. For example, invention, or coming up with ideas, we often call brainstorming. But here's why I'm mentioning them now. The second canon, which they call dispositio, or arrangement, was never really just understood as an organizational problem. It was understood as the act of making meaning. But we tend to teach arrangement or organization as really just moving things around as decoratively for writing. Where does the thesis go? How do you sequence your argument? You're finding the best container for the ideas you already have, not creating new ones. But that's not what Cicero really meant, and it's not what the tradition generally understood. Arrangement in the classical sense is constitutive, which sounds like a really big word, but it just really means that meaning and arrangement coexist together. They make each other make meaning. Arrangement is how meaning comes into existence. And the same material arranged differently isn't just harder or easier to follow. It can actually do different cognitive work. So think about the difference between a bibliography and an argument, for example. Same sources, but the bibliography is data, accurate, organized, findable. The argument is the information, because the arrangement has done the work of converting accurate citations into something that means something to a specific reader in a specific situation. That's really what rhetoric's all about. And every student who's turned in a paper with all the right sources, but somehow no argument, has experienced this firsthand. And this is exactly what technical writers do when they convert a subject matter expert's data dump into structured documentation. They're not organizing existing information. They're creating information out of data. And when that process fails, when a document has all the right content, but still doesn't work, the failure is in the arrangement or the organization oftentimes, because it hasn't cleared that second condition. It hasn't made meaning. So when someone with enough authority says, hey, it just works about structured content approaches, what they're observing is that information typed by function creates meaning more reliably than just plain old data organized by topic. That's really a dispositio argument. And this should reframe how you diagnose document failure in AI systems. When something doesn't work, the standard question is, can users find it? Floridi adds 2 more. Well, is it well formed for the specific task? Does the arrangement create meaning or just accuracy? Those are different problems with different solutions, and neither one gets fixed by adding more content. So for educators, the data information distinction is also a teaching tool. Students produce data constantly. One might say accurate, researched, grammatically correct data that hasn't necessarily cleared the meaning condition. And honestly, that's the problem with having AIs having students use AI. They've produced text, but maybe not necessarily meaning. And the feedback, organize your ideas better, doesn't tell students what's wrong. The feedback, your arrangement isn't building meaning yet. What do you want the reader to understand before they reach your conclusion? Actually is better feedback in that case. That's the difference between teaching organization and teaching dispositio. Whether you're building systems, designing course materials, or just trying to get a useful output from a prompt, structure is epistemic, not cosmetic. Another big academic word, which simply means that it creates knowledge. It doesn't just make things look nice. So if the same facts arranged differently produce different information, then how you organize your inputs is a meaning-making act, not just a delivery mechanism to the machine or to the user. And really, this is exactly what my course, Writing with Machines, helps you work through, how to apply these distinctions to prompt design, AI-assisted writing, and building chatbots and automations. You can see the link in the show notes or in this post on Substack. So dispositio is one thread in a longer argument I'm working towards. The classical rhetorical canons are, I'm starting to think, a pre-modern framework for the exact problem Floridi is formalizing. Each canon maps onto a different dimension of that same problem. How you generate material in the first place. Invention. How you arrange it for meaning. Arrangement. How style actually does cognitive work. Style. How knowledge gets stored and retrieved. Delivery. Each one has direct implications for how we build AI systems that actually serve our users. Now I'm developing that argument in a longer piece, so watch for it on Cyborg's Writing. And if someone in your field is wrestling with how to make a theoretical case for structured content information typing, go ahead and share this episode because the pragmatists are right that it works. And the reason it works is about 2,500 years old. I'm Lance Cummings, and until next time, arrange your data like it actually means something.